Okay, today's stuff we're going to learn is Bava Kamma Daf Yotet. Today's stuff is sponsored by Rochelle Chefetz in loving memory of her father, Shragai Cohen, Shraga Feivel ben Abraham ben Sion Alevi on his yurtzeit. His vocation, avocation, and love were centered around Israel. He instilled that love in his children, and it has been passed down to the next generation. Today's stuff is sponsored by Miriam Tannenbaum, Medina Korn, and Caroline Ofsteinley, Loy Nishmat, Sergeant Binyamin, Meir ben Zev David, Verachel Pessi, Hashem Yikom Damo, Binyamin Erli, son of our dear friends Jen and Rob Erli. The quality of Gvura and modesty personified him in life and even in death as he fell defending Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, both of which he deeply loved. His sense of mission was born out of the home of his parents, who strengthened Emunah, formidable and a model to all. Yehi Zichro Babu. Okay, we're going to get started. What I decided to do, even though it's hard to do this because it means we're going to go a little bit late, but I want to review the end of, actually from the middle of yesterday's stuff. I feel like I didn't explain some things as clearly as I would have liked to. So we're going to go back, and I made a chart that was a little bit more concise this time of the sugya that we did yesterday. So I want to go back to the previous, just getting to the top here. Okay. There were three questions of Rava. The first one, I'm not even going to go over. That had to do with something about the thing rolling. That was different. But then we get into the category of tzrorot. And really, for all of today's stuff, until we get to the next Mishna, which is about shen, we're really trying to talk about the quality of the law of tzrorot. Tzrorot, actually, before I share screen, I'm going to talk about this outside. Tzrorot, the idea is we have this concept of indirect damage. It's not grama. It's a little bit different. This is the animal is walking, and the main thing that you have to keep remembering, the animal is walking as it normally walks, doing something very typical, which again, typical falls into, I want to go over some basic rules that are really important to understanding all these dapim, means shen, regel. Those are typical behaviors, eating, walking, right? Damaging through walking, damaging through eating. This is a type of regel, really. By walking, the animal kicks up pebbles, but not kicking on purpose. Kicks up because he's walking, and they fly in the air and they damage something. Now, there's a halacha l'moshe Mishna, which Sumchus seems to not hold by, which is a whole question of itself. Halacha l'moshe Mishna is usually something that there's no machloket about, but there seems to be a machloket about here, although we will see in the Gemara today, they're going to suggest maybe he had the halacha l'moshe Mishna, just he had it a little different. But basically, it seems like he doesn't have that. He holds its full damages. The rabbis hold its half damages. Now, when we have half damages, that's all of a sudden a code for some other place where we have half damages. Where else do we have half damages? Keren. Now, keren is atypical damage, and keren has two basic main criteria. One is it's atypical, it's not expected. And number two, there's intent to damage. So the atypical makes you a little bit less liable. On the other hand, the intent to damage makes you kind of a little more liable. And that's why in the end, we say that keren, you're liable both in a private and a public domain. Shen and regel, you're not liable in a public domain. Now, why is that? You're only liable if the animal goes into someone else's field. Now there's really kind of two reasons, and we'll talk about them later today in the sugya. And I want to set everything up in the beginning so you understand conceptually. I felt like yesterday we were too into the details that we weren't able to zoom out really. So in the end, they say that there's why are they exempt in the public domain? Two possible reasons. It depends whose perspective you look at. You could look at the owner's perspective, which is my animal is allowed to be here, as opposed to my animal's not allowed to be in a private domain, right? I can't just trespass in your field, but I am allowed to walk my animal in public. So my animal does typical things. It's not, I can't be held responsible. If it's atypical already, that's something different. If we look at the perspective of the owner, okay, so now it could be also you're exempt because the damage they cause, let's say you left stuff in the public domain and my animal ate it. Well, that's your fault for leaving it in the public domain. What were you doing? What were you thinking? You know that animals walk through here, and right? It's like if I left something nowadays in the middle of the street and a car ran it over. I couldn't say, oh, I didn't expect that if I left it in the middle of the road, the car was going to run it over. Of course you should have expected that, right? That's what happens in the middle of the road. So same thing in the public domain. Okay, there's animals again out there weren't clear roads and they weren't everyone, right? There were animals walking, there were people walking, it was a balagan, right? So therefore, it was your fault almost, right? We shift the responsibility to the owner of the object. Why did you leave it there? So those are all some basics. Now, we asked this question. Let me just go through very briefly. I'll try not to take too much time on this, but the question is, the chatzi nezek tzrorot, is it like the keren chatzi nezek, where you pay migufo, or is it me'aliyah? Because is it just really, you're liable full damages, but we're making it only chatzi, so we'll treat it like the regular general payment for damages, which is me'aliyah, which again means from the value of the from beyond the value of the animal and not just up to the value of the animal. So again, it's sort of, do we view it as similar to keren or not? Okay, that's conceptually. But is it migufo? Is it me'aliyah? So first they brought this hidrus and muad. I'm not going to go through that. I want to go back to this Mishna of a kelev shenatal chararav alach legadish with this braita that added that the chatzi nezek that he pays on burning the stack of wheat was chatzi nezek, and it's chatzi nezek migufo according to the braita. Okay, the Mishna we're going to get to in a few dapim about this kelev that takes this, right? He's got the cake. It's attached to a coal. Now, basically, in the seesawing back and forth, can we use this as proof or can't we use this as proof? Again, I want to zoom out. It was really a debate of how did this gachelet fall? How did the coal get onto the ground? Was it typical? Meaning, if it's typical, it means the animal's eating it. The animal was eating it, and as it was eating the cake, the coal fell off of it. It was attached to the cake, and that's just typical behavior. If it's typical behavior, it's a classic din of tzrorot. If it's tzrorot, and you pay chatzi nezek migufo, there's our answer to the question. But in rejecting it, and again, without getting into all the details, but they bring up this Rabbi Elazar who says there's full damages migufo, and there's no such thing as full damages migufo. If, in other words, it wouldn't make sense to say that if there's full damages, why would it be migufo? It should be min aliyah. So they say it must be that he holds like Rabbi Tarfon, who says that this is mishuna keren b'chatzar anizak nezek shalem mishalem. And then we basically say this is a law of keren. This isn't tzrorot at all. In other words, what happened here? The animal put the coal down on the heap of wheat intentionally, okay? What exactly makes it mishuna is a good question. Rashi says that's what happens. It could be something else. We don't know exactly, but it wasn't while it was eating the harara that the coal fell. There was some sort of action involved here, which was unexpected, atypical. So we'll go with Rashi, who says he placed it down on the heap, okay? And then it's just a question of, this is keren, it's not muad, right? So it's chatzi nezek, but Rabbi Elazar says, like Rabbi Tarfon, that it's nezek shalem, because remember, Rabbi Tarfon's got this unique approach that if you go into the chatzar and izak and do keren damage, you have to pay nezek shalem. Why migufo? Then we brought in this Rabbi Yehuda approach about that, there could be this, the tzad tamut b'mkoma omedet, the half that was still, right? Muad is made up of tam plus half muad. Half tam, half muad. We're talking about the half tam is still migufo. Okay, and then the extra payment's going to be min aliyah, the other half. To which the Gemara said, well, if your whole motivation is because you can't figure out how you could get to nazek shalem migufo, and because of that you had to say this isn't tzrorot, it's keren. Well, we could tell you, we could come up with Rabbi Elazar paying nezek shalem migufo, even if it's tzrorot, but because of this Rabbi Yehuda, the tzad tamut shabo, to which the Gemara said, what are you talking about? Rabbi Yehuda said there's tzad tamut shabo. We look at it half plus the other half, only when it's a keren case. What's a keren case? Where it wasn't expected to do the damage in the first place. That's why we keep it as the first half is like tam and it's migufo. But not in a din of tzrorot where it was kedarka and it was expected to do this kind of damage, okay? Then they say, okay, fine. Last attempt was to say that maybe when Rabbi Elazar says nezek shalem, he was talking about, again, it's tzrorot, but why not chatzi nezek? Not because of Sumchus, but because it was a shor muad for tzrorot. And then we add in this whole other concept, which, Rava is his third question. Is there such a concept of shor muad and tzrorot? Which again means, right? Kamma says, no matter what, even if you've kicked pebbles 10 times, we don't care. It's still chatzi nezek. And Rabbi Elazar, when he says you pay me gufo, he's talking about yesh hada'ah litzrorot. You were already expected to do this kind of thing. Once you put it into muad and tam, then you can also continue with this tzad tamut b'mkoma omedet and have this migufo payment of the nezek shalem. And that would be a way to explain it. To which the Gemara rejects and says, no. And then it's this more complicated rejection. But the Gemara basically says, first of all, we don't like this because Rav already asked that question and didn't have an answer. Is there hada? Is there not? And if this is the machloket, it should have said it. And then it says, you could say that bein l'Rabbanan, bein l'Rabbi Elazar, kesumchus spirale. In other words, you could say that this whole machloket Tanakama Rabbi Elazar is only according to Sumchus. Now, if it's Sumchus, then what's the problem? The problem is that why would you pay chatzi nezek then? Sumchus says nezek shalem, right? And then you'd have to explain what's the reason. Well, it's a shinoi, okay? It was a shinoi and lo yaid. In other words, it was a case of keren. You'd have to say again that you didn't understand the case. The case isn't tzrorot. It's a case of keren, where it was a strange action, and it's based on this machloket between, the whole machloket between Kamma and Rabbi Elazar is only according to Sumchus. Sumchus says, right, nezek shalem, migufo. Kamma says chatzi nezek. Why? Because, and then it's based also on this machloket Rabbi Tarfon and the rabbis. If it's b'chatzer and nizak, do you have to pay or do you not have to pay? And then it's keren. And then basically we get into this other understanding, which then could say this has nothing to do with our topic because it's not tzrorot, it's keren. Again, I'm not going to go into all those details, but that's the basic idea. Okay. Then they had that whole problem, side problem with Rabbi Tarfon, but that we answered. Okay. So that's a summary of the sugya, which again, really what we're doing in this whole sugya is seesawing back and forth between trying to prove from the dog case, trying to say it was a case of kidarka. It was done as he was eating the coal fell, in which case it's tzrorot, to which we keep pulling on the other side. No. It's either not tzrorot at all, or it's tzrorot with keren involved. In other words, there's a change here. There's something different, which puts it into the world of keren, and that explains the migufo part. In other words, again, once you say keren, we wanted to know, and I want to just be clear, we wanted to know, is tzrorot, do you pay migufo or not? If we can prove, because remember, this Mishna didn't say migufo, but the Braita on the Mishna said migufo. Once you say it's migufo, if you say it's tzrorot, then we have an answer. If you say, oh no, this is keren, not tzrorot, then we don't have an answer. And keren is usually what has migufo, and that's kind of an easy way out to say you can't prove from here because this is keren. Once we put it in the rules of keren, then we leave the world of tzrorot, and then it won't prove anything about tzrorot. So that's basically the seesaw here. And really what they're deliberating about, which was similar to a previous case with the rolling and the pail, what's the reality of the case? It wasn't clear enough in the Mishnahs there what exactly happened and what we're paying the damage for. So, well, here we know what we're paying the damage for with the rope. It was, is it the rope? Is it the deli? Is it something the deli hit, right? There was a deliberation about what the reality of the case was. Here also, it's what happened. You realize it's more, how did it happen? And that affects which category we put it into and whether we can come up with an answer to the question. So in the end, they actually don't really have an answer because it could be explained in this way and it could be explained in that way. Okay, that was a better explanation than I did yesterday. Okay, the next question was yesh hada'a tzrorot or ein hada'a tzrorot. And this was basically a question of, is there a concept of shor muad by tzrorot, which would mean, and remember this because this is going to come up soon, do you pay half damages for the first, second, and third time you had a tzrorot issue, but the fourth time the animal does it, perhaps you have to pay full damages. So we're up to the third possible answer here. Tashma, from the 4 lines at the bottom of Yud Chen Amud Bet. Ditani Rami Bar Yechezkel. Here we're going to have 2 sources. One is a braita that Rami Bar Yechezkel brings, and one is a halacha that Rav Yosef brings from the house of Rav. Pay close attention. One is a Tanaitic source, and one is not. Okay, which doesn't so much matter, but it's always important when you bring contradictory sources. Usually it's 2 Tanaitic sources. Here we'll see it's the words of an Amora, and then we're going to say, well, how could he say something against a Tanaitic opinion? It must be we're talking about 2 different things, maybe. So let's see, or 2 different opinions. So now, Tarnagol shoshit rosho la'avir kleis chuchi. A chicken puts his head into a glass jar, vitakabo ushvaro, and he makes a sound like, the typical rooster sound, and, right, cock-a-doodle-doo, and it breaks. Okay, we all know, right, opera singers, right, you could sing this very high, make some high notes, and it could cause something to break. This is kind of like the wings, right, when the bird moved its wings, flailed its wings, and a wind blew from the wings, and that caused the damage. That's tzrorot, right? This kind of indirect damage where you do an action that causes something else, which causes something to break. So here we have the sound, which the sound waves then cause the glass to break, and mishalem nezek shalem. You have to pay full damages. Okay, we're going to have to see, why do you pay full damages, right? If it's tzrorot, you shouldn't pay full damages. But Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Beirav, sus shetzanaf b'chamor shena'al. Okay, we have a horse neighing and a donkey braying. V'shiberet hakelim, it breaks the vessels. Mishalem chatzi nezek. That's din tzrorot, right? So why do we have tzrorot full damages and tzrorot half damages? My lav kigon de'avitzlata zimne. So what do they say? Maybe this can answer our question. We wanted to know, is there such a concept of shor muad by tzrorot? And that's the machloket. It was after 3 times already. Mar savar yesh hada, umar savar ein hada. So the Tanna Kamma says there's hada, which means you're going to be liable, not the Tanna Kamma, the Bright Rami Bar Yecheska brings, you're going to be liable for full damages because you already did it. This is your 4th time. You're forewarned already. And the other one, Rav Yosef, who quotes Rav, is saying half damages, savar ein hada. Okay? Now that would assume, we didn't hear this in any of the cases, but both cases are talking about after it's already happened a number of times. To which the Gemara says, lo, bechadzin. No, it could be the first time. And it's not at all that machloket. What machloket is it? Classic. Plugta de Sumchus v'Rabbanan kamiflige. At this point, you could write this part of the sugya, right? We keep going back to, oh, you have a case of tzrorot, half damages, full damages. It must be a machloket, Sumchus and the rabbis, because Sumchus says you pay full damages. Now they say, how could you say this though? V'hameshunehi. But this is not classic case of tzrorot because it has a shinoi, meaning this is atypical behavior. We don't generally have a rooster who sticks his mouth into a kli and it breaks, right? So they say, oh no. And then you'd have to start saying maybe it's rules of keren, right? Or something like that. Well, they say di'ipe bizrani. No, don't worry about that question. This has food inside the kli. So when he put his mouth in the kli and made the noise, he was eating, and through eating, he made this noise, and then it broke. And then we basically say, like, just like we had with the cake. As he was eating the cake, the coal falls. That's basically typical behavior. And then it's a classic case of tzrorot. And then, again, you could say it's just the machloket Sumchus and the rabbis, in which case we do not have an answer to our question. Is there a concept of shor muad by tzrorot or not? We don't know. By Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi, okay, those were 3 questions of Rav, and now we're moving to some questions of Rav Ashi. Yesh shinoi litzrorot l'ravia nezek, or ein shinoi litzrorot l'ravia nezek. Now we want to know, what if we put together keren and tzrorot? Do we get to a quarter damages? Because you have keren of tzrorot. So tzrorot is half and keren is half. So if you have a short time who's never done this before, and you end up with a case where they did tzrorot, but not that the animal was just walking normally and kicked some rocks by accident, as it was walking in its typical manner. But you did something atypical, okay, caused damage. Do we drop it now? Regular tzrorot will be half. So tzrorot with a shinoi, where it already puts it in the world of keren, where you only have to pay half damages, would pay a quarter, because that's half of a half. Or do we say there's no shinoi l'tzrorot l'ravia nezek? Or we say no, all tzrorot are half, whether they're with a shinoi, whether they're not with a shinoi. So they say, well, tifshat lemidirava. In other words, what do you see here? We can learn it. We can get to an answer from Rava. What did Rava ask? To buy Rava, we just had this question. Yesh hada litzrorot or ein hada litzrorot, right? Is there, now, let's remember, I told you to remember this because we're going to come back to it. What was his question? Is there shor muad by tzrorot or not? The question was, is there half damages by tzrorot or full damages, right? Does the concept of muad exist, which would then make you pay full damages once you're a shor muad, not allow you to pay quarter damages if you're a short tam? It was either half or a whole. It wasn't a quarter or half. So, michlal de ein shinoi. From here, you can infer that there is no such thing as shinoi l'ravia nezek. There is no quarter damages. It doesn't exist. To which they say, what are you talking about? No, there's 2 types of tzrorot. There's typical tzrorot, okay? Dilma Rava imtim talomer kamar. Maybe Rava was saying this, okay? Imtim talomer is if you want to say, meaning imtim talomer ein shinoi. If you want to say, in other words, maybe Rava's question was twofold. Number 1, is there shinoi or not? Meaning, if you do tzrorot in an atypical manner, do we drop you to a quarter, and then only in time 4 do you move up to half? And if you want to say ein shinoi and you have to pay half damages no matter what, and there is no such thing as a quarter, still yesh hada o ein hada. But what if you do it in a typical way? And then do we say after time 3, you already have to pay full damages? So perhaps he does still have this as a question in which we answer Teiku. We don't know the answer. Okay, so it's not clear. By Rav Ashi, koch kocho l'sumchus ki kocho dami olo. We saw this already before. Koch kocho, right? Generally, we call tzrorot kocho, meaning the koch, the work, the action of the animal caused the rocks to fly, the pebbles damaged. Okay, that's koch. From the koch of the animal came the damage, because if it weren't for that koch, right, it wouldn't have happened. What if the animal kicked the rocks, and then, right, as he's walking, the rocks fly up, the rocks hit something, which then rolls, right, like we talked about yesterday, like a Rube Goldberg, kicks something else, right, moves something else and breaks the third item. Okay, so three things: the pebbles to the vessel to, let's say, another vessel. So would Sumchus say it's kekochodami? There is no such thing as chatinezek tzrorot. So that's also going to be liable for full damages. Olo, or maybe, right? Maybe he says it's not. Maybe koch kocho, you really only be liable half. Now, here are also two sides of the question. Mi gamir halacha, and this goes back to the question I said before about could it be halach l'mosh misinai if there's a debate about whether there is halach l'mosh misinai or not. Usually, halach l'mosh misinai everybody has. So, mi gamir halacha, maybe he did have this halach l'mosh misinai about tzrorot, just moke labakoch kocho. He just understood the tzrorot chatzinezek as koch kocho, as more indirect. You're going to be liable half, but just indirect, no. Odilma lo gamir halacha klal, or maybe he doesn't have the halach l'mosh misinai at all. Take it. Okay, and with that we end with a question. We don't know. Now we're back to the case in the Mishnah. Let's start with the end. We have two cases here where you're going to have to pay half damages. Now, there's two ways to read this Mishnah, or we're going to see maybe even more. We're going to read it in two ways, which is going to have one kind of ramification. Then Rav Asher is going to read it in the same two ways, but with different ramifications. Okay, you're not really supposed to understand that yet. We'll see in a minute. So we have two cases. What's the first case? The animal kicks. Now, what is kicking? It's a tolada of keren, of goring, because it's a kind of intentional damage as opposed to the animal was just walking, right? Here the animal kicks. Now here we're talking about kicking directly. Kicks someone. That's the first case. The animal was kicked a person and broke his leg. Or there were pebbles, okay, this is classic din of tzrorot, under its legs and broke kelim, mishalem chatzines. So now, there's two ways to read this. They ask the following question. I'll pull up the study guide again and we'll view it inside the chart on the second page. So here's two versions of how to read it. Now, the real question is only with the second line. The mive'etet is obvious. The animal's kicking and kicks someone directly. What's the case here of tzrorot? Is it that's case number one. It was kicking and damaged with its kick. Or it was walking and knocked some pebbles and the pebbles went flying, which is, again, kedarko. Kedarko is a key term for saying it's just a tolada of regel, right? Mishalem chatzinezek v'Rabbanit. And then it would be the rabbis, chatzinezek tzrorot. Dilma, or perhaps it's saying, which is the same, okay? Kicks causes damages, chatzinezek, that's keren. Tzrorot machmat bi'ud. Do you read the Haitama ve'edet as the topic sentence? Haitama ve'edet, it was kicking and caused direct damage, or it was kicking and as it kicked intentionally. Now this is what we call mishune. It's not typical behavior with tzrorot. And then tzrorot or machmat bi'ut mishalem chatzinezek. Now, according to this, what is it saying? If you do something atypical, you'll have to do half damages. But what would that imply if it was typical? If it was typical, you'd have to pay full damages. So haki orche mishalem nezek shalem. Now, why would you have to pay full damages if it's tzrorot? Well, obvious reason. Mane sumchusi. So then, if you read that the tzrorot have to do with the animal kicking, only when it kicks you liable half damages. Otherwise, you're liable full damages. Then you get to the fact that sumchus, right? The first reading of the Mishnah would say this is the rabbi's opinion. The second opinion of the Mishnah, the second reading, is that it's sumchus. And then you would get to the conclusion that what? Sumchus holds that if it's mishuna, if it already goes in the category of keren, you're going to pay half damages. But if it's regular tzrorot, you're going to have to pay full damages. So the Gemara is going to try to answer which way do you read it. And they're going to say, oh, well, look at the seifa, the continuation of that Mishnah. Tashma mi seifa. Darsa ala kli ushvarto, v'nafla nafala shever al kli acher ushvaro. Okay, here the animal steps on something, breaks a kli, pieces go flying, breaks another kli. On the first one that it stepped on, you pay nezek shalem, that's direct damages. Ala acharon, on the second one, chatzi nezek, because it's tzrorot. So Sumchus mi'ile chatzi nezek. Sumchus wouldn't say chatzi nezek there. That's kedarko, right? It stepped on something, broke it. That's classic regel. Something went flying. That's classic tzrorot, not Mishna, not strange, right? Typical. And it's chatzi nezek. That's only the rabbis. Sumchus would say full damages. So you can't say the other line is Sumchus if this line is not Sumchus. The chitema, now if you want to say, maybe we didn't understand the case of the stepping. Maybe rishon lahatazah, v'sheni sheni lahatazah. Maybe the first one means the one it stepped on a vessel, that's vessel one. It flew and hit another vessel, that's vessel number two. When the Mishna says the first one, they actually mean vessel two. The first one that got caused indirect damages, you pay full damages, that's Sumchus. And then if that one damaged another thing, right? Again, animal steps, this goes flying, breaks this, that goes flying, breaks something else, right? It all caused one, it's all causal. So if you say that, and then the second one mentioned in this Mishnah is actually the third one, and shani le'sumchus ben kocho le'koch kocho, and then that would go back to our question we asked before, that maybe Sumchus differentiates and says you're actually going to have to pay only half damages for indirect. Well, Elahadabai Rav Ashi, you can't possibly say that, because otherwise, if that's the way to read this Mishnah, Rav Ashi would have clearly had an answer to his question, right? Remember, Hadabai Rav Ashi, remember, he asked the question, is koch kocho like, right? Is it liable full damages or is it half damages, according to Sumchus? Well, tifshot le delav kocho dami, right? We'd have it very clear in this Mishnah then that it's not, and you only pay half. And we don't have an answer to that question. So obviously that's not the way to read the Mishnah. So we reject the option that it's Sumchus, it must be the rabbis. But, and there's a big debate about how to fit this into the structure of the Gemara. You could say a few different things. I'm going to go with one answer, which is now we're going to explain where Rav Ashi originally asked a previous question about the Reva Nezek. It was from here. Okay. Now about the Shinoi. Remember, Yesh Shinoi L'Revia Nezek. So now his whole question was based on how to read our Mishnah. Okay, so now we're going to reread the Mishnah with the two options, but actually that they mean something else. Okay, let's read it. Rav Ashi karabana mokela. Okay, Rav Ashi for sure. Okay, we know for sure because we just said if it was Sumchus, he would have had an answer to his previous question. So for him, it was clear that both options are according to Rabbanan. But what's the debate here? What's the debate about how to read it? His question was the following, and again, it's the same two readings. But the what you infer from here is different. Okay, that again, that's the first line. Everybody agrees. The only way to read the first line is it was kicking and damaged directly as it was kicking, or because that's keren, half damages because it was a short time. Tzrorot who again, option one is, or not that the animal was kicking, the animal was just walking. Pebbles flew in the air and damaged. Chatzi nezek. Now, according to this, what could you infer? Now the inference is going to come from this part, not the second option. If that's the case, what is it saying? If tzrorot were done in their normal fashion, the animal was doing something typical, you pay half damages. Then if the animal was doing something atypical, like for example, bi'ut, ha-machmat bi'ut, if it kicked, which is keren plus tzrorot, remember, keren is half, and tzrorot is half, you would get to a half of a half as a quarter. And then you would infer from here, if it was machmat biyud, it would be reva nezek, it would be quarter damages. V'yesh shinoi, and then we hold there is shinoi. O dilma, haitam ve'etev yizika b'biyuta, again, first line, same thing. It was kicking intentionally and it damaged, pay for half damages, keren. O tzrorot machmat biyud chatzi nezek, ve'ein shinoi. Or we say you were damaged, right? The tzrorot happened because of a kick. Again, atypical damage. And what do you see the halacha is? Chatzi nezek. If it's chatzi nezek, then you say ain't shino l'revia nezek. There is no tzrorot plus keren drops you down to a quarter. No, there's no such thing. Tzrorot, keren is all one and the same, right? It doesn't matter whether it's keren or not keren. It doesn't matter if it's typical or atypical. No matter what, you're going to be liable for half damages. So basically what this is doing is this is explaining that the question we asked earlier that Rav Ashi asked, okay, we can go up on the chart and see it, by Rav Ashi, Yeshino Litzrorot L'Ravia Nezek, or Ein Shino Litzrorot L'Ravia Nezek, was all based on two readings of this Mishnah, okay, this line in the Mishnah. And that was his question. And we already know, Teku, we don't have an answer to this question because we already asked the question before and said there was no answer. Okay, more questions because today is a question day. Right? What's interesting about this is a few things. Number one, we're trying to conceptually fit in this chatzi nezek. Is it, right? Where does it fit in with what we know? Number two, it's just interesting to see that the rabbis were struggling with trying to understand this, right? It wasn't so clear to them where to put things. So Rabbi Abba Bar Mama asked Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba. Okay, he either asked Rabbi Ami or Rabbi Chia Bar Abba. Let's say, let's go back to Ruth's ox is the one who damages and goes into Naomi's field. Naomi's field is full of pebbles. There's no way to walk without walking on pebbles. So now, ba'ata v'hitiza v'yizikama. So now, if she's going to kick rocks from just walking and the rocks go flailing, well, it's not her fault really because it's full of rocks. On the other hand, she's in someone else's field. But basically, we're saying it's right. She's walking and there's no other way to do it. But what if she does bi'ut? She kicks them. Even though, right, anyway, walking would have caused damage. But in this case, she kicks it, which is atypical. And then, there's intent to damage. So do we say, Kevan de'ef sharla orchehu? Since there's no other way for her to walk, this is typical. In other words, again, the whole question is it typical tzrorot or atypical tzrorot? And again, we don't know what the ramifications are. We all ask the question, are there ramifications or not? But whatever ramifications there would theoretically be, is this a case of shinoi or not? Because since there's no other way for her to walk, no matter what, she's going to kick up these rocks. Maybe we say this is typical because there's no other way to walk but to step on them. Or do we say no? In the end, why did the pebbles get thrown up in the air? Because she kicked them, not because she had no choice. So Teku, we don't really know. And again, you could see why they deliberate here. It's not really clear what would be, whether it's both are really right. In the end, it was because she kicked. On the other hand, she would have done it anyway. There was no other way to walk without kicking them up. Rabbi Yirmiyah now asks another question. Not Rabbi Yirmiyah's second question, it's Rabbi Yirmiyah's first question. He asked Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera has asked the following question. Walking in the public domain, and the animal, now biata is in parentheses. Some people have this girsa, some people don't, but it seems like you can really only understand it with this, whether it was in there or not. They obviously mean the animal kicked. Because why? If the animal is walking in the public domain and kicks up rocks accidentally, that's kidarka. What did we learn? Toladav regel. And regel in Reshut HaRabim is exempt. Now, what if the animal, though keren, is liable? So what if, again, we have this combination, tzrorot and keren? It's atypical behavior because the animal kicked it, and it's a Reshut HaRabim. Now, if it's keren, you're liable in Reshut HaRabim. If it's regel, you're exempt. So hitiza v'yizika mal the keren midamin alei v'chayevet. Do we say it's like keren and you'll be liable because it's the public domain? Or do we say no? This is a toladav regel and you're exempt. So amarle mistaber toladav regel. Rabbi Zera rules it's a toladav regel even if it's atypical. In Reshut HaRabim, you're going to be exempt from tzrorot no matter what. So now he asks another question. Good question. Since we're talking about pebbles being thrown in the air, theoretically, the animal could be in the public domain and kick them into the private domain. So then the damage is done in the private domain, although the action happened in the public domain. Classic Gemara question. Mau, Amarle, Akira aimed kan, Hancha yesh kan. This sounds like laws of Shabbat. If you remember, there's Akira, lifting it up from one reshut and putting it down in the other reshut. But without getting into that, he basically says, there was no problem with the uprooting of it because that was done in the public domain where you're not liable. So how could you possibly make him liable for the fact that it happened to end up in a private domain and damage there? Which again, this goes back to what I said before. The focus here is the animal allowed to be in Reshut HaRabim? Yes. Is the animal allowed to walk in Reshut HaRabim? Yes. So the fact that the damage ended up happening somewhere else doesn't really make a difference to us. But we're going to see that Rabbi Zera is going to change his opinion about this, okay? Change his mind. ATV. So Rabbi Yirmiyah now attacks his first answer. The fact that you're going to say that keren, that atypical tzrorot in Reshut HaRabim are going to be more like regel, he says, but look, haytama alecha baderech v'itiza bein b'reshut yachi bein b'reshut HaRabim chayav. Here it says if you're walking and you damage, which again must be atypical damage, whether it's in private or public domain, you're liable. So now, my love, this sounds like in Rishut Rabim, you're in Rishut Rabim and you damaged in Rishut Rabim, and you're liable. That sounds like it's not a toladav regel, right? We're going to see it more like keren, because it's with a shinoi. It was different. To which they say, lo, so Rabbi Zera answers, it must be, when it says either Rishut Yachid or Rishut Rabim, what it means is the damage started in Rishut Rabim, but it ended, meaning he kicked it in Rishut Rabim, but it ended in Rishut Yachid. And that's why you're liable. To which Rabbi Yomi says to him, what are you talking about? Ha'amarta, you yourself said, Akira ein kan, hanacha yesh kan. Since it wasn't done in any right way that would have been forbidden, because it was done in Rishut Rabim, it doesn't matter that it landed in Rishut Yachid. So you're trying to say this is chayab because of that, but you just said that case was exempt. Amar lei hadrebi. So Rabbi Zera says, oh, I changed my mind. Okay, I actually think that if the animal kicks in Rishut Rabim and it lands in Rishut Yachid, you actually are liable. We're going to do the exact same thing with two other sources, and same type of question. We're assuming Rabbi Zera thinks what he thought originally, and then Rabbi Zera is going to say, I changed my mind. So, remember, he says two halachot. One is Rishut Rabim to Rishut Rabim, and there he says you're exempt because it's toladav regel. And then he says, even in Rishut Rabim, and it goes into Rishut Yachid, you're also exempt. That's the one he's going to change his mind about and say in the end, you're chayav. So all these questions start off on the first one, and then from his answer, Rabbi Yomi asks about the second one, and then he changes his mind about it. This was from our Mishna, right? Steps on the kli, breaks it. Then it falls on another kli and breaks that. Now, Tane Allah. Now, here's the important part. We didn't see this yet. So again, indirect, the first one that's direct, he pays full. The second one that's indirect, he pays half because it's tzrorot. There's a brayta that says, what's the case there? This was all in the domain of the one who was damaged. But if it was in public, you're going to be exempt for the first and liable for the second. Now, what do you see? You're liable for tzrorot in Rishut Harabim. Because here it was, right now you'd have to say it was somehow b'shinui. So now, my love, is this not a case where it started in Rishut Harabim and ended, the damage was in Rishut Harabim, in which case it goes against your first halacha? No, no, you could say it was started in public, but the damage was done in private. But didn't you say you're exempt there because you're allowed to do it in public? Amarle Hadrabi says, I changed my mind. Third question against him. Again, these are all the exact same thing, except here we're going to have a possible second answer to the question. Ini, moving now to Amabet. Whenever you have chatzinesek, which we assume means tzrorot and keren, right, short time, there's no difference Rishut Yachid and Rishut Rabim, meaning you're going to be liable in both spaces. So, my lavitiza b'Rishut Rabim v'zika b'Rishut Rabim, isn't this tzrorot in Rishut Rabim, where it started in Rishut Rabim, ended in Rishut Rabim, in which case that goes against your first halacha, Rabbi Zera, to which he says, no, when it says whether it's in the private, whether it's in the public, it means starts in the public but ends in the private, right? But didn't you say Akira ein kan hanacha yesh kan? But didn't you say you're exempt there as well? Amarle Hadrebi. He says, no, I changed my mind about it. Now again, what's the reason to change your mind about it? Because in the end, you damaged someone's property that was in their own private domain. And what did we say? Remember, we said there's two sides to this argument, why you're exempt in the public domain. You could be exempt in the public domain because what was the person doing leaving their kelim, their vessels in the middle of the street? But in this case, the person didn't have their kelim in the middle of the street, right? This person had their kelim in a very protected space, and somehow the rocks that your animal threw from the public domain landed there. Well, of course, you're going to be responsible for that. And that's really his conclusion in the end. So in the end, he explains that source, but there's another way to explain that source. Ki Amar Rabbi Yochanan keren. He said chatzi nezek. We assumed chatzi nezek meant both shor tam, shor muad, keren, and also tzrorot. But now we're just going to say, oh no, it wasn't talking about tzrorot at all. Chatzi nezek was talking about the chatzi nezek of shor tam, shor muad. Wasn't talking, right, in keren damage. It wasn't talking about tzrorot. And then you can answer it in that way. More questions. Yativ Rabbi Yehuda Nasi of Rabbi Yoshaya Akila de Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, they were sitting outside the door of Rabbi Yehuda's house. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Napik Milta B'Menaya. They start talking. One asks the other. Kishkik Shabbos Navamal. Animals wagging its tail in Rishut Rabim and damages. What do we say? What are you supposed to hold your animal's tail? We all know it's kedarka. That's just typical, and therefore, again, you're not responsible. So the other one answers, but what? You're going to say, hold your animal's horns? We know that you are liable in Rishut Rabim. And we don't say, right, hold your horns and go. So they say, oh, you're comparing apples and oranges. Keren lav orche, hi orche. Again, we go back to this distinction. What is keren? It's atypical for the animal to gore. It's true, they're sticking out, but they're not generally moving and goring with them. But the tail, they always wag their tail. So that's typical. To which they say, if it's orche, then why were they even asking? It's obviously it's a toladav regel then. Well, kishkush yiterim b'baile. They were talking about what if he's wagging his tail very strongly? That would be, maybe you would think. And no, in the end, that's kedar. By Rav Huna, a little bit of an unpleasant graphic question. Kishkishaba amatama takes the animal's penis and waves it and ends up hitting into somebody. Mi amrina midi dehavia keren. Keren lav yitzra katakif lahachanami loshna. Well, it's just like keren. Keren, he has some evil inclination that gets into him, something that causes this to happen. Same thing with this case. Odilma, keren kavanato lazik, ha'en kavanato lazik. Or do we say, no, it wasn't like the animal was intending to damage in this way, whereas when the animal gores, there was intent to damage. So again, we have these two things about, right, what defines keren here. Here they add a different thing, which is the yetzer takfo. Okay, his inclination got into him and caused this action, which then would compare the cases, or maybe not. Teku, again, we're left without an answer. Now we're getting to this case where the animal, this chicken in the Mishna, if you remember, if the chicken walks and damages, obviously that's regel. But if it had a string attached, like a rope, okay, it got tangled in a rope and starts walking with this rope, and the rope damages something. So the Mishna said, if it breaks kelim along the way, then mishalem chatzi nezek, then it's only half damages. And then comes Rav Huna, which right now we think Rav Huna is defining, limiting the Mishnah. He says, Lo shanu ela shenikshar me'elav. Only if somehow the animal, the chicken gets entangled with this rope. Aval ksharo adam, but if somebody tied it onto him, chayav, then they would be liable. So now, nikshar me'elav, they want to understand, okay, so he's basically saying, nikshar me'elav, right? Then you're going to be liable, okay? Lo shanu ela nikshar me'elav, your half damages, right? If the person tied it, they're liable full damages. I wasn't clear about that, right? The Mishna is talking about when they say half damages, if it gets attached accidentally, okay, right? Not by any human intervention. So now they say, who's chayav? There's two options. Who are the two options? The person whose rope it was, who left it there, or the owner of the animal? It's actually a good question. So, and then we're going to say neither of these make any sense. Why you'd be liable half damages only. Okay, if we're going to say the owner of the rope is the one who's responsible, well, hechidami, there's two options. Okay, what's the case? Ida atzne, if he hid the rope and somehow the chicken found it, well, then it's not his fault. Anusu, that's not his fault at all. He did whatever he was supposed to do to protect it. Somehow the animal found it. That's not his, or the bird found it. It's not his fault. And we shouldn't be liable anything. If he left it right there, well, posheahu, we should be liable full damages. It's his fault. What did he think was going to happen? Ela chayav bala tarnigol. So let's say it's not the baal of the owner of the rope. It's the owner of the chicken. Ma'ishna kule nezik tilo. Well, now why is he not liable full damages? Right? If he should be responsible. Well, the reason is because what is this delil? What does it come into? What category? It's not the animal damaging on his own. It's actually what we call bore. It's a bore because it's now the animal created an obstacle in Rishut Rabim. There's now this rope that he's dragging that's now going to damage. So it's a moving bore, but we'll see. Moving bore is possible to have. But there's no such thing as an animal creating a situation of bore. Notice what the Torah says. The reason why you're not liable full damages, delo k'tiv ki yiftach delo. Sorry, not why dichtiv ki yiftach ish bor velo shore bor. It says when a person digs a bore, not if your shore dug a bore and someone fell in, you wouldn't be responsible. So chatzi nezek nami ish bor velo shore bor. Then you shouldn't even be liable half damages. So this doesn't make any sense. So they say in the end, elamanitim ba'adye aduye. Okay, so Rashi says, what's adye aduye? The trying to go directly through the rope and it broke something. And then that's direct damages of the animal and not bore, right? An animal creating a situation of bore, which you wouldn't be responsible at all. And then it's, right? So then, ki itmar de Rav Huna, and then you'd have to say the following. Then, right, so 1 second, shiber bizrikato, right? So that's tzrorot, because the animal threw it. It's kind of like the beita, where the animal kicked it, and then it broke, right? So kicked the rocks and it broke something, threw the rope, and the rope broke something. So that's tzrorot, and that's why it's half damages. And that Rav Huna wasn't defining the Mishna at all. Ki itmar to Rav Huna, be'alma itmar. He was talking about in general, okay, meaning something else. He wasn't relating his statement to the Mishna. So what was he saying? Delil hefker. He was talking about a delil that someone left on the street and disowned, okay? It has nothing to do with that anymore. And Amar Rav Huna, nikshar me'alav patur, ksharo adam chayav. Now, you'd have to explain mishumai chayav. So now he says, if it was tied by itself, then it's totally exempt, because that's an animal or a chicken here creating a situation of bore. That's not liable. But if a person did it, they're chayav. So now, my chayav, what's the chiyuv of the person? From what does it come? You could create an obstacle that's tied around the legs of your animals or your birds. So that's what it falls into. It's bor hamitgalgel. Okay, moving now to shen. Mishna. Again, there's two ways to read this. The Gemara read it one way, but I recommended, which I kind of like this reading better, which is, this is just a quote from the previous Mishnah. How is the shen muad lechol tara'ola? The Gemara said this was about a chaya, and the next one's about a be'ema. But habe'ema mu'edet lechol, sorry, the Gemara said that earlier. Habe'ema mu'edet lechol perot v'yerakot. So what does it mean, ra'ola? It means fruits and vegetables. Achlak ksut okelim, ate clothes or vessels. Mishalem chatzines. You only pay half damages. You ever see the book Gregory, the Terrible Eater? It's about a goat who doesn't want to eat anything. And right, goats are supposed to, according to the book, eat all sorts of junk and things, and not junk food, like, real metal, things like that. And, the parents are all upset he doesn't eat those kind of foods. You're not a real goat. Anyway, this seems to imply, no, goats don't eat atypical things like that. Ksud and kelim, clothes and vessels, they don't eat. Okay, this is a separate thing. So we distinguish between, if it's typical food, full damages. Atypical food, keren, right? Half damages. When are you chayiv in shen? This goes back to the basic law of shen, b'reshut hanizak. In the private domain, we already learned this a million times, about b'reshut are being patur, but in the public domain, you be exempt. Im nehenet, mishalem et mashe nehenet. If the animal benefits in Reshut Arbim, eats your food, okay, let's go back to Ruth's ox, eats Naomi's food in the public domain. She's not liable for the damages, because what was Naomi doing there? But since she ate her meal already, and Ruth now doesn't have to pay for the meal, Ruth has to compensate Naomi for the meal that she didn't serve her animal, basically. The meal she saved, she has to compensate. Now, it doesn't correspond to the amount of damage she caused, about how much she ate of Naomi's stuff, because it could be she ate caviar, and what the animal would have eaten was worth a lot less, and we'll get into all that in the Gemara later. So in what case do you really pay only what she benefited from? Well, it all depends. If it's on the street, in the middle of the road, then whatever she benefited, Ruth has to compensate, right? Whatever Ruth's animal benefited, which then benefited Ruth, she'd have to compensate. But already on the sides, where it's more like a private domain, mishalem et mashi zika. Then it's like as if it was in somebody's house, and you have to pay the caviar price. Okay, mi petach hachanut from the entrance to the store, mishalem et mashi ne'enet. Mitoch hachanut mishalem et mashi zika. From the entrance of the store, that's public. From the inside the store, that's private. Tanu Rabbanit. We'll just finish with this bright, and then we'll end a little bit earlier before finishing the daf. So now we have to figure out what's the line between typical food and atypical food. The Mishna set up fruits and vegetables versus clothes and vessels. So now the Gemara says, things they typically eat and drink, that's full damage, as long as it's in the chatzer nizak. This is also typical behavior. Undomesticated animal attacks an animal and eats the meat, right? As opposed to lions, we said we're a little different in this area. Now, usually the para eats the karshinim and the chamor eats the seorim, but here each one ate food that was typical for someone else, not for that animal. Likewise, apparently pigs eat oil according to this, and dogs eat meat. And this time they flipped. Who ate what? Again, it doesn't have to be a total flip. It could be just one ate the one that was typical for that, or the other this. That's still considered typical. Okay, we're going to talk about this a little bit more tomorrow when we get to Rav Papa and what he infers about this. But we're basically going to say it's not just the typical food you eat, but other foods that theoretically you would eat even if they didn't have the food you wanted, let's say. Okay, so that we're going to get to more tomorrow. Okay, so quick review. We finished all these slew of questions about where does tzrorot fit in. Chatzi nezek, how similar is it to keren? What if there's a shinoi? Do we then have keren plus tzrorot? How does all that work? We had a lot of different questions there. And then we moved on, right, to understanding other parts of the Mishna, which some of them connected to those questions, some of them didn't. And then we got to the shen, and now we're going to learn all about shen in the upcoming daf. Wishing everybody a good day and hoping for better news.